guess you just heard what Hakeem Jeffries said there. What's your response? Do you regret voting for what he calls the big ugly bill?
Well, first of all, to be clear, I'm an independent, and so that's, I think you're referring to the matter of caucusing, which under the existing House rules, you're sort of forced to choose one caucus or the other. I think that's actually kind of crazy. I think that if you're going to be an independent, you should have the ability to decide whether or not you want to affiliate with either caucus. But, in any case, the idea that, if you voted for one piece of legislation that Leader Jeffries happens to disagree with, that somehow, defines your political identity. I think that's exactly what's wrong with politics in this country, is people are trying to put you in a box and say, if you don't agree with me on this, then I don't want to work with you on that. And by the way, when you're talking about that particular piece of legislation, it actually is true that there were some fairly significant cuts to Medicaid that were initially proposed. I opposed those, as did some others in the House, and as a result, those did not make it into the final version of the bill. The final version of the bill actually increases Medicaid spending over the course of the next 10 years, and the reforms it includes is saying that if you're going to receive free taxpayer-funded health care from the government, and you're a young, able-bodied person without dependents, then maybe you should at least be looking for a job or volunteering 20 hours a week. I think that's broadly supported by Republicans, Democrats, and independents across the country, not to mention the fact that this particular piece of legislation is giving people substantial tax relief, middle-class families, child tax credit that people are seeing in their tax returns right now.
So it doesn't sound like you regret voting for it.
No, I mean, no piece of legislation is perfect. That particular bill was a pretty massive piece of legislation. I actually don't think that's the best way to do legislating. It's sort of the habit that the House has gotten itself into. But at the end of the day, this legislation included this significant tax relief that if we hadn't passed the bill, we would have had the biggest tax increase in American history. We also had significant funding for securing our border, important defense funding in that bill. And then, by the way, the things that I didn't want in the bill, I actually succeeded in getting out of it. So there was a provision in there that would have allowed for public lands, that I represent a big public lands district, to be sold without meaningful local input. I very actively insisted that I could not vote for that, and it was out of the bill, as well as these the genuine cuts to Medicaid that were proposed by some did not make it in the bill because I opposed them.
So you brought up this idea of the caucusing, and it is an important issue because of the way that the House works. So the way that the House works, for people that aren't political junkies, is basically everybody's got to vote for a speaker. Whoever wins speaker then gets to determine who's on all the committees, who's voting when, how it's run. The House is really driven by majority rule, and that's where you get your power in the House. Seniority and majority rule. So if you're a legislator, you say you're going to decide based off of what's better for your district. Is there a world where you vote for Hakeem Jeffries for speaker? What would need to happen for you to think that that's in the best interest of your district?
So you got it close to correct, Alex. So the committee assignments are sort of the property of the two parties, and so that's one of the manifestations, I think, of what's kind of broken about Washington, is that everything is driven by partisanship. And so the way that the rules of the House are structured right now is that even if you are an independent, you are forced for administrative purposes to associate yourself with one party better. So what I said is that, because I was elected for this term with the Republicans, of course it makes sense to for those administrative purposes to finish out the term without association, even though I am an independent, and that's how I'll continue to approach every vote. So yeah, as far as next term, of course, I'll decide at the time, based on whoever the candidates are, what's best for the folks that I represent.
But in a way, wouldn't it be the best thing to vote for whoever's in the majority, right? To give yourself a better chance at it? I mean, I'm just trying to think of the rationale, because it is an important thing. I mean, determining control of the House, we saw how close the margins are. Your one vote could determine who the Speaker of the House is, and then control all the different committees and control what happens in Washington. And that's why I think there is interest in wanting to know, so that people don't feel misled one way or another. I mean, you understand that there's a legitimate question.
Well, I mean, I didn't give any indication of who I would support for Speaker, when I ran in the first place.
We knew you weren't going to support Hakeem Jeffries, right? I think that was
I think
clear.
the folks that I represent care about, the issues that are important to them. And so they're not there, I'm not, when I run, necessarily telling people how I'm going to vote on each and every issue, because you can't anticipate each and
That's
every
a pretty
issue
big issue, no?
is the values that I'll support and that I'll try to fight for as the representative, and that will be the case with each and every vote. And I think right now the biggest issue facing most people in this country is just how unaffordable it is, especially in my state of California, which is why, by the way, I think it'll be helpful to have a representative who is willing to fight against the policies both in Sacramento that are driving up costs as well as fighting the lower costs in Washington.
Is there anything that the Democrats are doing on affordability that you think is better than what the Republicans are doing?
I think there's plenty of common ground that we could find, especially on issues of healthcare. Like you had me on your show a few months ago, and we talked about a bill that myself and Sam Liccardo came up with to provide for a temporary extension of these healthcare subsidies that were expiring, and we got broad bipartisan support for that bill. Unfortunately, it was not brought to the floor for a vote. I think that kind of the leadership of both parties did not have an interest in making that happen, and so it didn't happen. So yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunities to partner with both sides to address these issues. I think there are more opportunities than meet the eye, but it's sort of the endemic partisanship of Washington that prevents them from moving forward.
Well, there's no doubt that there is major partisanship problems in Washington, and that is something we could have a much longer conversation about. But we appreciate you coming on here to make your case. Kevin Kiley, now independent member of Congress from California. Thank you so much, and good luck on the run.
You bet. Thanks for having me.